Well, good afternoon. We're going to do the notes on video today for the items that we had covered Monday and Tuesday of this week for the first part of World War II. And a couple of things that I want to make clear. So much of this is a propaganda war. You look at the poster here. You can see a devastated city, a mother who had been killed in the bomb blast, the poor child that is now an orphan. Fire in the background, and you can see lifting from the fire. It shows the picture of Adolf Hitler, the face kind of like a demon, and the sign, "This is the enemy." So propaganda is going to be a huge component of what we're going to cover today. Now, 61 nations took part. That was a good portion of the nations on the planet that existed at the time. There's 110 million in all of the world's militaries. 65 million people will die in this war. It was an absolutely horrific period in world history. About 10% of the American public will serve in the armed forces. That equates to about 16 million. Most of those were drafted. So as much as we talk about the greatest generation and the idea of the volunteer spirit, the majority of people who will fight for the United States have to essentially be told that they're going to fight. We're going to lose 400,000 Americans, about 1 million casualties. And the whole period of colonization, which we think starts around 1492 with Columbus, will really begin to wrap up starting with World War II. A lot of these colonized nations and territories are going to break away during World War II and in the 20 years after the conflict. Incredibly expensive war. We have never seen a war as expensive as World War II. Just about all the other wars that you add up in American history. The American Revolution, War of 1812, Mexican-American War, Civil War, Spanish-American War, World War I, Korea, Vietnam, Persian Gulf War. You add them all up, it still doesn't equal World War II. So when we talk about World War, where is this thing being fought? Well, I can tell you about the only place there isn't conflict is Antarctica. It is a truly global war, and not just on the ground. It's also in the air, under the water. But the four main theaters that we're going to focus on is the European, the Atlantic Ocean theater of operation, mostly against the Germans and the Italians. There's the Russian front. Now, we provide supplies for the Russians. It's not like we take place in a lot of the combat there. The Pacific front, that would be the one that we would focus against Japan. And even in North Africa, we're going to see combat operations there and in various other parts of the world. Truly a planetary conflict. For the first time, we're going to see conflict and combat focused on aircraft and naval weapons, particularly the submarine and the aircraft carrier. I think it's important also to kind of consider, I don't want to call it insane, but it sure seems pretty close, how the Axis powers thought that they were going to take over their regions, if not the entire planet. Now, the bottom map right here, you see in black the greatest extent to which the Axis nations would go and control their territories. They're going to fight the countries in blue and in red. I want you to think about that for a moment. Realistically, it was kind of a fool's errand for them to try it. And yet, they had enormous success in the opening years. A few things go their way, maybe they do succeed. But I would say most historians would agree there wasn't a great deal of opportunity for them to actually win on their own. Now, what eventually leads to the war? What are the causes? We talked about this when we covered World War I. The Treaty of Versailles, which ended World War I, not only made Germany pay reparations, so they had to pay for a lot of the damages of the war. They lost their colonies. They lost a lot of national prestige, lost a lot of their military. But they also had to accept total blame for the conflict, and that's going to lead to a lot of Germans having a sour taste in their mouth. People like Hitler will also be rather angry and use that to their advantage. There's a Great Depression. We had done that in our unit before Christmas break, which had spread throughout the world. 25% of Americans without a job. 50% of our manufacturing ability had been diminished. And in a country like Germany, for example, which is heavily industrialized, you lose those jobs and you lose the ability to provide employment for your people. People get desperate and they turn to people that, well, like Hitler, like Benito Mussolini of Italy, like Hirohito of Japan, are fascists. Now, this is a different governmental system that we've covered. The U.S. is a democracy. the Soviet Union, who will be our allies, are communist. But fascism is a government system where the leader is the focus. They are the most important part. The citizenry is not important. Also keep in mind, the U.S. had a desire to remain neutral. We did not want to get involved. Part of it was we had had a bad experience in World War I. We lost 100,000 Americans in 11 months of combat, and we didn't see a point of getting involved in the war. And there were financial issues we'll come to in just a minute. A lot of the European nations wanted to appease the aggressors. Places like Germany were given what they want. Germany wanted Czechoslovakia. Germany wanted to combine with Austria. Germany wanted to rearm and militarize. Instead of stepping in and forcing the Germans to comply with their agreed-to Treaty of Versailles, the British and the French and other countries just let them do what they want. The League of Nations absolutely failed to step in as well. And this was the organization after World War I. The whole purpose was to prevent future wars by having an international council that would intervene and stop these aggressive nations. I don't make you memorize a lot of the leaders, but I think this is one you really do need to know the people. We tend to reference a lot of these people today, but understanding their backstories, which we will get into this unit, is important as well. Obviously, Adolf Hitler is the most famous of the bunch. Now, you can hear the anger in his voice as he's giving his speech. Hitler used the national anger about losing World War I, the national anger about their economic problems, and the hate over Jews. There's a lot of anti-Semitism at the time, in order to motivate those people to not only support his rise to power and appointment to the German government, but later when he took it over. Now, Benito Mussolini, that's a hat, by the way. He doesn't have weird hair. He's actually bald like Vin Diesel. Benito Mussolini taught Hitler how to be a fascist leader. He was a fascist leader long before Hitler was. He and Hitler have a lot in common, and so Germany and Italy will form a very close relationship. And you're noticing that unlike Hitler and Mussolini, where there's a lot of yelling and a lot of passionate speaking, Tojo is a very calm and quiet speaking individual, and that was expected in Japanese culture. So those are the Axis nations. They saw themselves as what the world turns around. We're going to look at them as the bad guys. Let's just be honest about that. On the other side is, of course, people like our former president, Franklin Roosevelt.
I repeat again that I stand on the platform of our party. We will not participate in foreign wars.
So Franklin Roosevelt is talking there about how we're not going to be involved in foreign wars unless we are attacked. And he holds true to that. That's helped him get re-elected in 1940. And he stays that way until Pearl Harbor, and then, of course, he is fully involved and invested in getting the U.S. To declare war on Japan and then later Germany. Winston Churchill.
Brace ourselves to our duty. So bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
One of the most famous speeches by Prime Minister Churchill of Great Britain. He would be a major part of the Allied powers, as will, well, quite frankly, a man who murdered more people than Adolf Hitler, the Soviet Union leader Joseph Stalin. And so these three individuals, Roosevelt, Churchill, Stalin, were called the Big Three. They're the leaders of the Allied powers. You're going to need to know those 6 people for the test. Now, the U.S., as we previously said, wanted to stay out of a European war. We actually stayed out for the first 2 years in Europe, the first 4 years in Asia for the war. We did sell weapons to our allies, but even oil to Japan as late as 1940. but we're ignoring Japanese militarism, and that was a massive mistake on our part. And that's going to blow up in our face in Pearl Harbor. As you can see, let me skip through this. Japan sees the U.S. as the main obstacle for its empire. They planned this attack for a year. They hit on a Sunday. We talked about that in class, the reasons why. 2,400 are going to die in this attack on the American side. We're only going to shoot down 29 Japanese planes. So really, maybe 50 Japanese die versus 2,400. The goal of the Japanese was to knock the U.S. out of the war right at the beginning. And within 6 months, Japan sweeps across the Pacific and really takes over the entire area. Now, the U.S., because of the way Japan did it, Japan had not declared war before they had attacked. The U.S. sees this as a sneak attack. And as you can see from this image here, there's still a little bit of latent racism in that they believe the Japanese weren't capable of planning and executing this attack. It must have been the Germans. So that's going to lead to some assumptions that will slow down the level of combat in the Pacific. There is a lot of severe racism against the Japanese. If I have time, I'll play a song in class. Fast buildup of the military. We talked about 60% will be drafted into the military. 10% of our entire population will join one of the armed forces, whether they want to or not. As I previously said, and I'm not going to play it right now, but if you look up, we're going to have to slap the dirty little Japa. It's offensive, and I apologize for it. But if you go on YouTube, you can hear the song and just see some of the racist ideology that's coming out from this period. Now, in Europe, let's talk about the focus. The Allies agree to focus on Germany first. So there's going to be two fronts. We're going to attack Germany from the western side, essentially invading France and going to Germany. And we're going to support the Russians as they try to attack from the east. To help the Russians and really to help our allies stay in the war, we're going to send lots of supplies in the early years because we don't have the military and we don't have the capability to take the war directly to the German people. We were convinced, to invade North Africa first, and that will be our first taste of combat. We'll get into that later. In Japan and in the Pacific, because the focus is on Germany first, the military is given just enough equipment and strength in order to hold the Japanese from expanding further into the Pacific. And we do a lot of island hopping. We would bypass some islands that the Japanese held, let them starve on that island. We don't need to waste resources and time in order to take back those lands. And a lot of this is done. The attacks are done with aircraft carriers. The ability to project air power, this is a war that certainly proves you have to be able to control the air if you want to be able to win a war. Propaganda is a huge aspect, and it's using media to gain and motivate and control and shape public opinion. All nations use propaganda, and it's really playing to emotions. Now, if you get time, go on YouTube and look up the video I have right there, The Fuhrer's Face. It's a Donald Duck film. And take a look at some of the stereotypes that we see about our enemies. Radio, magazines, movies, all sorts of things are used to shape the Americans into, lather them up into a hate of the enemy and big support for our allies. And I do encourage you to watch that video when you get an opportunity. I'm not going to have a lot of time to go through the propaganda, but as you can see, there's a lot of stereotypes. Again, as I previously discussed, the Japanese shown as almost rat-like, almost cowardly, pulling on heartstrings, the idea of a dead service member because somebody talked. If you know secrets, keep quiet. Churchill, kind of echoing the Uncle Sam poster of the U.S. from World War I, deserve victory, calling people individually to do it. Even the Nazis did it. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. One people, one nation, one leader. Painting Jews in a very negative light, that they care only about gold, that they care only about themselves. And the title of this poster, The Eternal Jew, saying that it's a quality that will never change. And so that justified how the Germans would treat the Jewish people. So if you have any questions, please come see me. Make sure you're filling out your notes page that I gave out at the beginning of the week. And hope to see you soon.